The Feeling Good Handbook by David Burns is one of my absolute favourite finds of all time. It shows you how to do cognitive therapy, something which I introduce in more detail in another video. Now, while I personally ended up needing a whole stack of interventions that were both biological and psychological, as a single intervention and as a place to start, this has to be one of my very top ones. This book is written in a careful, gentle, clear style that's accessible to anyone. Dr. Burns clearly had a lot of experience helping people who are depressed, because as I read this for the first time, I remember feeling like this book was speaking to me. It was like he completely understood me, even though he'd never met me. This is one of those books that is deeply comforting to the extent that even for a couple of years after having read it, I would have it around and I would dip back into the relevant section if I was having a tough time. It was good enough that it could help in those circumstances to break the flow of thoughts that I was having, and if I was unhappy, help me to remember how to replace them with something more positive and helpful. The most important aspect of this book, and the biggest pitfall that I've seen people fall into with it, is that like all cognitive therapy, you've got to go through the process of doing the written exercises that come with this book for a period of time. That means that you need to write in the book in the places where it asks you to, and do the homework. If you don't do these things, then whilst you may feel better while you're reading the book, my opinion is that it's going to be virtually impossible for those changes to stick in your life. The reason is that cognitive therapy is all about changing the way that you think about things, changing how you choose to respond to events. And those thoughts and behaviours, they're all very hardwired in all of us. Indeed, in cognitive therapy, they're called automatic thoughts because these are thoughts that just pop into our head in response to an event. And think about it, you've learned since you were a baby and built up these automatic thoughts, these thinking patterns over years, from many influences in your life. So you need to work to change that, and you have to go over that process repeatedly. It's like any new skill. Learning to play a new piece on the piano for the first time, doesn't mean that you can play it flawlessly until you've done it over and over. Thinking patterns are possibly even a bit more ingrained than that, and I find it very clever how cognitive therapy and the work in this book uses the written exercises and the structure to create such simple exercises that over time let you essentially reprogram your mind and those thoughts by practicing over and over. The value of the exercises is profoundly illustrated in the evidence that this book carries in its preface for its own effectiveness. Believe it or not, there is actual good scientific study evidence to show that this book works. And when they ran these experiments to find out how well it worked, they compared this book to people placed in a group reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Now, if you've read Man's Search for Meaning, you'll know that it's one of the most profound, moving books that you'll find anywhere. In fact, I was utterly gripped when I read it for the first time, and I learned a lot about the human condition that stayed with me to this day. In the comparative study, though, they found that Man's Search for Meaning had no impact on depression in the long run, whereas Feeling Good does have that impact, because as much as you're learning perhaps in both of those books, it's the process of going through the exercises and the structure of cognitive therapy that allows you to work on those thoughts and change them no matter how tangled they may be. The premise is that as you encounter situations that you react badly to, or they make you feel bad in some way, you remember those, and then later on you go on to write those thoughts down. You then identify the problems with your thinking from a list of common distortions that David explains in detail, and then replace that thought that you had with a more realistic one and measure whether or not that makes you feel better. There are a variety of similar exercises for all kinds of common problems. If you can orchestrate enough self-discipline to spend 15 minutes a day on those exercises, even for 30 days or so, then like learning the piano, they're going to start to stick. I did this in the early 2000s, and during that period I was a diligent student. I was desperate to get better, and I put the time in. Whenever my mood fell off, I filled out one of these exercises. In fact, I ended up filling out dozens and dozens of pages of exercises over the course of a year or so. I've still got that stack of work that I did. I also wrote coloured lists of the common distortions and put them above my bed to remind me about all of that. My thinking pattern started to shift very quickly, however, it took that sort of constant effort for this truly to become natural to me. I've tried other cognitive therapy books, but this is by far the best that I've personally read. The handbook is perhaps a little bit better than Dr. Burns' other book, Feeling Good, because in my opinion it covers more ground as well as covering all of the basics. So it also covers things like anxiety, procrastination, improving communication skills. It's well worth saying that the communication skill section is particularly good. In fact, it's changed, I think, the way that I communicate to this very day. If you're having problems with relationships or relating to other people, then that section is gold as well. I found doing bibliotherapy from this book to be deeper and perhaps arguably a little bit more useful than even the therapy that I did in person. That's surprising to me as I look back and think about both of those experiences. And partly it may be because I had more time to spend with the book, and I am the sort of person that learns well from books and was able to do the written exercises on my own and stick at doing those. I did a little in-person therapy before the book, and I did a fair bit more afterwards. And that second time doing it in person was more useful, as it helped me to untangle those things that remained that I hadn't quite managed to work out on my own. However, for some people, I think face-to-face therapy might be a better way to start. A therapist can obviously take you through all of the concepts, and there's nothing like working with another compassionate, well-meaning, well-trained human being who can help to support you. So it really depends on who you are and what resources you have available, and I'll discuss my experience with in-person cognitive therapy in a bit more depth in another video. As I said in my other video introducing cognitive therapy, this material is something that I would dearly love to see taught more widely, even in schools. Looking through my purchase history, I could see I've given away at least 15 copies of this book over the years. It shows how useful I think it is. If there's enough interest, I might delve into and talk through how to do some of these fundamental exercises from cognitive therapy in some future videos as well. Anyway, I hope you find this book as useful as I did. Good luck on your journey, and I'll see you in the next video.